It's... there we go. Not entirely sure how to respond with "it's over," but it is. Bizarre. Yeah. So it was actually the apple inside. Okay. At least it's not kind of artifacts all doing exactly the same thing. That was rubbish. I'm not entirely sure if there's anything actually good with that. The riddles weren't as good. I've kind of made that point in this session already. They weren't as good because you didn't have any kind of... You couldn't solve them. I think you'd basically have to randomly stumble upon them. You wouldn't be able to go, oh, you're talking about this thing. Certainly the last one with the you need to have the rats and whatever. I'm not sure I like that Napoleon was looking for the artifact. I don't know if there's any reason to say that. It's easy. I don't think he's a figure similar to... I was thinking of him at the end. Hitler... who went out looking for these artifacts. He went out looking for artifacts. I don't know about these. Obviously, not these artifacts, but artifacts in general. He was looking for to give him either a legitimate, actual, concrete gain or some kind of psychological gain of we have these artifacts, they're much better. That we actually have artifacts, you don't. Therefore, we are better. We're blessed by God. Blah 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 blah. I don't think Napoleon acted like that in any way, shape or form. I think we'd probably be aware of that. So it feels like you've taken this great French general and kind of taken and made him this kind of weird character, this kind of odd character. You could have just had him appear at some points and complain. I don't know if he was ever court-martialed for treason, or deserting his post. That's something I might actually look up. You shouldn't make big claims like that because that's stuff that people will look up. Although I'm having issues with the Assassin's Creed series and history in general. It's just the storyline wasn't as good. I'm not sure I like the fact that there was so much underground. And the underground was primarily reachable. Certainly this area, I think, was only really reachable through the basilica. And the only way to get through the basilica was through the basilica was always that kind of special area that you couldn't just go into. So I think just kind of mechanically that didn't seem like a good idea to me. There were hats in this game that you could collect. That's probably the only good thing about this little DLC. There are hats. The area, I know I kind of complained in the previous game, in the main game, that the area was too big. In some ways, this map, partially because with the riddles particularly, the map felt too small. And so they didn't have enough things to kind of hook riddles onto. So in Unity, Paris was so huge. There was so much to see that I think they kind of packed it with far too much stuff. And in this one, I look at it and go, in the same way, although it's smaller, there was too much side stuff going on. Like, I mean, there's so many things I've got. I mean, when I loaded this up after the kind of break and I had to close the game and reopen it, I had 38% of the game. But there is just so much stuff in the DLC and in the game because they filled it with these huge open world systems. and they've made this huge open world, and so they feel they have to fill it with all kinds of different things, and they don't really need to do that. They could have things around, and I think if they'd had more landmarks in this area, they could have hooked onto it. Maybe talk about particular famous streets. And what on earth was that little spear doing? And once you've got those kind of little landmarks, you can then start hooking onto them. I think quite a few of the riddles in the main game were based on landmarks that you could read about, or based on database things that you could read about. Whereas it felt like in this one, and again, I'm kind of repeating myself here, you had to kind of stumble on things a lot more. I think they could have made this a bigger, have more story to this. There are a few points where they hint at Elise's death. Like, you see someone run past, and it's the character is she only looked like Elise, which I think would have been, I think they could have played with that a little bit more, and I think maybe have, I've forgotten the lad's name. Oh, what's his name? Leon. I think they could have played with that, kind of played around with that with Leon, like have Arno get really annoyed and really kind of protective of him in a few missions, and then it kind of eventually it becomes obvious to the player, oh, the reason he's doing that is because the last time he was kind of with someone in this fight against the Templars, it worked out. I think, speaking of the Templars, we didn't really meet any Templars. We had, I mean, the main, well, not he wasn't really the main villain, but Napoleon was the kind of guy who was kind of having things happen. But we're told, oh yes, Eve. We're passing things to Eve. I think, I don't know, did we know an Eve in the previous? In the main game. I don't think we know an Eve. In the sense of someone who's who's kind of around. And I think, unless they're trying to, I mean, they can't be hinting at something for Syndicate, because Syndicate is late 19th century, isn't it? It's I think it's late Victorian. London. Woo. Killing more British people. And, which of course makes sense because you're in Britain, and I assume it's going to be more along the style of this game and Brotherhood and 2, where there aren't really sides. The sides are Assassins and Templar. They're not kind of fixed to a particular war, which is I think probably my gripe with 3. In this game, it's not necessarily. I'm trying to think. I think we kind of went after both sides, and not just like with Elise and her faction of the Templars, which in a way I think would have been a really interesting story. Having just popping into my head, I think that could have been an interesting idea, to have the two factions of Templars, and the Assassins are manipulating things a little bit, and they're taking sides, and you could have played. I think they could have played with that as well. I'm just sitting here thinking of really cool stories they could have done. I'm not sure I like kind of just seeing all these things going on. I'm not sure I like the idea of Arno using the apple. I'll call it the apple, because that's what it is. In this final section. In some ways, it feels like, I mean, it's not like he's vengeful against these people because they've done something, like killed Leon. It's not like these are the people who killed Elise. So we're at this position where he's just going around and attacking, destroying people with this. I don't know. I think, yeah, this is. I think they gave this out free because of all the glitches with Unity, didn't they? They basically scrapped all DLC after this, and this is they gave this one out for free. Yep, there's the floating spear again, going past. Oh, it's probably just a hopping sword. But the game just, this DLC I think is. I feel worse about this game having played this DLC. It's not great, in the sense of, it is like I've kind of run out of things to talk about. Narrative, I think the narrative is, I think they had an idea of how long they wanted the DLC to be. They designed it to be that long, and then that's what they've done, and that means that they've cut out bits of the story that I think would have worked. Okay, no, that is a halberd. Okay. So, for example, they could have had more character development with Leon. They could have had a few more instances with Elise. I understand that you kind of want to keep things slightly vague because you could go to this at any point, but that's just, why not just make it after the main game, so that way you don't have to worry about spoiling the end of the main game. Just make this happen. I think they did that in 2, I think, where they had a couple of bits of DLC that just they slotted in at particular points. Having DLC that is story driven and fits into a particular part, canonically fits into a particular part of the story, I don't think works. I think you need to make a decision. If it's canon, if the DLC canonically in the story fits in a particular position, it needs to be in that position when you come to it. It needs to fit into that position. So this should have only become available at the end, because then that gives you more room to talk about the story. That gives you more room to kind of play with things that happen at the end without having to worry about spoiling things, because that's what happens. So I think it would have been good to have seen more about Arne's reaction to Elise's death, because he hasn't really reacted, apart from seeing someone who looked and dressed like her and going after her and running after her and tackling her, and maybe his reticence to allow Leon to get involved. But I think that could have been stated slightly. It could have definitely been kind of spoken about in a clearer fashion, to discuss that and actually have, some kind of importance in what it's doing, and explain that part of his character. Why is he leaving France? Other than to allow that's my controller going. These are really long. These are really long credits, just like the main game. I assume it's just the same people, just on different background. So I probably could just skip through it. What was I complaining about? What was I complaining about? There we go. Let's just be completely blunt. I don't know why he suddenly wants to leave France, because there's been no hint about that, other than him and until the points here. And again, I think that goes to that point of, if they'd written this later on, if they'd written it in mind of, this is going to be sequence 13, we're not going to let the players do it until after they've finished. That allows you to construct things a bit more. You can talk about, legal notices are at the end. You can talk about, here are the characters that have happened out of, here is his response to Elise's death, her death, he just wants to escape. He just wants to leave France. Where is he going? Is he joining the various émigrés running away from the French Revolution, coming to Britain? Is that maybe the link into Syndicate, or a link into Syndicate? Is there any connection there that you can talk about? What about words? What makes him decide to? Well, does he decide to stay? And there are so many questions that I think could have been explored had they made that decision of kind of ending, of having this be the actual end and working from there. But alas, they wanted to have a bit of DLC that... Peace be. Lantern of Sondheim. Should I? Yeah, let's bring that back on. Right, the memory. No, that actually wasn't that good. Let's make it 2. So there we go. There we go, and that's not hideous at all. So I think the problem they had with this is going back to the open world sandbox flexibility of basically wanting everyone to have the free reign just to be able to do things when they wanted to, which meant that you have to then allow people to play the DLC at the wrong time. Kind of allow players to play the story out of order. So to do that, you then have to minimize spoilers, which means you minimize the character arc and the character development, which I think, from a narrative perspective, is just kind of detrimental. You need to have a character arc, and that character arc has to be consistent. And I think forcing that flexibility on this section basically took away, I think, some of the strengths that the DLC could have had in terms of the narrative and the story. Yeah, I'm complaining about sandbox open world games again. I know. Well, there we go. We've finished Assassin's Creed Unity, and we've finished Dead Kings. We now have a terrifying face on our belt. Let's just no. So, I think what I'm probably gonna... I don't know what I'm gonna do next time. Some people have said play Chronicles, because the modern day story. What modern day story? But the modern day story of Chronicles has a better follow on kind of from Syndicate. No, the other way around. Is that it's Chronicles and then Syndicate, that the stuff from Chronicles feeds into Syndicate. So yes, I'm assuming that is assuming I'll be going straight into another Assassin's Creed game. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I will kind of think about that in my standard way of silliness. I have a system, and there's madness in the method, I'm sure. But so we'll work through that if we do Assassin's Creed. I don't know which one we'll do. Sure. Some people have, as I said, some people have said that it should be Chronicles before Syndicate, but no one said the other way around. So maybe I should just do it that way. I don't know. Right. Yes. So this is where we say farewell to Arno. In some ways, I think narratively, I think it would make more sense to say goodbye to him when you lose after Elise's died. But again, you get back to that sandbox flexibility. You've got to allow people to run around, so you can't force the player to say goodbye at a particular moment. And I think for someone who prefers their stories narrative driven, I think sandbox can be detrimental, but I mean, I say that Oblivion and the stories that I told in my Oblivion Let's Play, which is more sandbox than this, I think were really good. Because there were little stories and they built up. Whereas I don't think we've had that here. And I think because of that, the narrative has suffered. Because we've had to play through the missions. Because it's not that sandbox. But because they're trying to make things sandbox, in some ways they force you to play some of the side things. Which is not quite true, to be fair, actually. But they do have you... they do have to weaken the narrative of the main sequences, the main missions, so as to allow for people to do things in different orders, like this. And I think that suffered, and I think it suffered because of that. And I think Assassin's Creed basically needs to decide what it is. Is it an open world sandbox? So it of a similar vein to Bethesda, or is it a linear narrative focus? In which case, it needs to ease up on the open world sandboxness. Yeah, I'm just complaining about open world. Maybe I should. I just went through a rope. Maybe I should stop here before I kind of start cycling through arguments. So yes, there we go. We've finished Unity. We finished Dead Kings, and I think it's time to say farewell to Arno, and farewell to you fellows. I'm not entirely sure what's going to come next. It might be one of the Assassin's Creed things. It might not be. We'll find out together. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for watching.